Hello and welcome back. This is Jennifer McGuire. Sorry it's been a bit since I've done a video, but I decided to take a few days to reorganize my craft room and it really felt good. Well, I'm back and today I am sharing with you an embossing folder pop technique. What this is you create an ink blended background, you use an embossing folder, and then you add a little pop to it to make it stand out even more. Super simple, basic supplies, and a great way to get a new look from your products. I'll start by doing a bunch of the backgrounds and then I'll show you the cards I made. For this, you'll need a heavyweight white cardstock. I'm using Neenah Classic Crest 110 pounds Solar White, and I have a link to that below. I'm also using my Altenew inks and an Altenew large ink blending brush. This is my favorite brush to use when I want to cover a large area with ink. You can see it applies very nicely and you get smooth coverage. Now in this case, I'll blend 3 colors together. What I do is I start on one side and apply the ink, start on the other and apply the other color of ink, and almost meet in the middle. Then I'll come in with the third color right there in the middle. Now I will say that this technique will work with any of your dye or pigment inks. Distress oxide ink should work fine too, but you don't want to go direct to paper here. You want to do some sort of ink blending with any inking tool so that the color really sits on the top surface of the white cardstock. By the way, you can also start with a colored cardstock such as a light pink or light blue if you prefer, but today I focused on using white because then it will really pop. If you're one of those who struggles with ink blending, this is a great technique for you because it's very forgiving. You don't have to have a wonderfully blended background, anything will work. Okay, now I have an embossing folder here. You can use any embossing folders. I chose to use all 3D embossing folders today from Altenew. 3D embossing folders give a lot more dimension than regular. You have like the raised areas, the lowered areas, and then kind of like a smooth mountain between. It's really cool. So I put in my ink blended cardstock here. I like to use tape to hold it in place by taping it closed. Now you can use whatever die cut machine you have. With these folders, I use my Spellbinders die cut machine. I put down the platform, then the embossing folder, and then one clear cutting plate, and that does just the right amount of pressure. And so now we have this ink blended background with all that dimension to it. Now you could leave it as is. That looks super cool, but I wanted to show you another way to change it up. This is the pop technique. For this, you'll need a sanding block or sandpaper. I like to use the Paper Artsy sanding block, which I had shared as one of my favorite tools this year. And by the way, a big order of the sanding blocks is on its way to Simon Says Stamp, so you can reserve yours if you're interested in trying them out. There are multiples in the pack and they are handy. In this case, I use it to remove some of the color from the raised areas. Since the ink is really sitting on the surface of the white cardstock, since we did a light ink blending, you can easily sand it away to reveal the white below, which gives that fun pop technique. It makes your background pop. Okay, now I thought I'd show you a variation of this. You can actually use the same embossing folder, but put your paper in the opposite way. So one time I had it facing one side of the embossing folder. This time I'm having the inking face the other side of the embossing folder. And I'll run this through. This time the raised area is the opposite. So when I do the sanding on it, I get a different look. So keep in mind, all 3D embossing folders, you can try both ways. So you can try it facing one side of the folder, try it facing the other side of the folder, and you'll get 2 different looks. So last time the squares had the white pop look. This time you have the grid look. Completely different look, same embossing folder, same technique. Okay, let's do a bunch more of these backgrounds. I think the more you see this in action, you'll see how impactful it is and how it works with a variety of embossing folders. This time I'm doing orange, pink, and then like a coral in the middle. Again, any inks really would work here. Okay, now a lot of people ask if you need to spray your cardstock before you use an embossing folder, if you need to spray it with water. You can if you want to. With this technique, it really doesn't matter, but if you want to, you can give a light mist of water to the back of your inked cardstock before you do the technique. I did it here, didn't make that much of a difference. But if you ever have trouble with your paper cracking with an embossing folder, a mist of water first on the paper really does help quite a bit. But in this case, we're going to sand off those areas, so even if the paper does crack, it doesn't really matter. Okay, this time I'm using a fun new Tulip embossing folder from Altenew, which is going to be a favorite of mine this year, and check out the beautiful results you get. Well, I wanted to make that stand out more. If you wanted to, you could stop here, but I'm doing that pop technique where I just use my sanding block to remove some of the color from the raised areas. Now remember, this is a 3D embossing folders. Some areas are raised more than others, so some will get more of a sanded pop effect than others will. The nice thing about the sanding block is you can kind of get into the nooks and crannies, so you can remove more color wherever you want to make it pop more if you prefer. So check this out. Isn't that beautiful? A very simple technique, but it gives more definition to the embossing folder that you use. Now, if you wanted it to be more subtle, you could have used a light pink or light yellow cardstock and then put the ink on that. Okay, let's do a bit of masking on this example. I thought I would do part of the background green and part of it a teal color. So I wanted to show this that you could do any kind of masking. You could do stenciling to apply your ink to the background and then do the embossing folder. So really the sky is the limit. I wanted to really highlight the embossing folder technique. So I kept most of my backgrounds pretty simple, but you don't have to. Okay, now I'm using the new Altenew Diamond Stars 3D embossing folder. This is definitely a great one for this technique. I'll put my cardstock in, run it through my die cut machine, and make that impression and check out this really cool result. You can leave it as is if you want to and just add whatever you want for a simple card, or you can step it up by doing the pop technique. Super easy to do here. You end up with these little white dots along the pattern, which I really think is fun and a great way to make that background pop. So I really like this one, and it got me thinking it'd be fun to make those dots a different color. So here's another example. I'm using the same embossing folder facing the same side, but I did ink blending of some pink and corals. This time I'll do the same embossing folder pop technique to create the white dots. However, now I'll step this up by lightly applying a bright yellow ink over those dots, over the raised areas. So now I have yellow dots on the pink and orange background. Really fun way to get a new look out of that embossing folder. Now this time I'm using the same embossing folder, but having my ink blending face the opposite side of the folder. And you'll be amazed at the different look that you get simply by turning it over in the embossing folder. So here is our blue and purple embossed background. Looks really cool like this. But when I take the sanding block to this, we end up with this kind of star pattern. Last time we had dots. This time we have a star pattern. Again, same embossing folder. I just had the ink blending face the opposite side inside of the folder. I love that I'm able to get these different looks from an embossing folder. Embossing folders have a great price point and they're making a big comeback, so it's fun to come up with new ways to use them. Okay, for this next one, I'm using a floral embossing folder that I've used in videos before. I'll link up here to the top right, so you can check that out if you want to see another technique using this folder. This one's really neat with the embossing folder pop technique because there is a lot of raised dimension on this one. Some is raised more than others, so some gets more of that white highlight, but it really makes those flowers pop. For this next example, I'm using the Altenew Ornamental Feature 3D embossing folder. Altenew has many 3D embossing folders that have like a focal point or words or a frame, and it works great for this technique too. Here I'm doing the sanding block, which really makes that pattern pop. You always want to use a cloth to wipe away that extra paper that you've sanded off. Otherwise, it kind of sticks to your paper, so just use a dry cloth to wipe it away. And there you get a completely different look using the sanding technique. So I'm having so much fun creating these backgrounds. I'll do a few more and then we'll turn them into cards. But this is a great technique to do a bunch at once so that you have them ready to make into whatever card occasion you need. Now this is the angled Mosaic embossing folder. I've used this one in a video before that's linked here in the top right. And look at how cool that looks when you use the sanding block on that. This is the Altenew Ribbon Waves. This one is a really great embossing folder with lots of dimension, but you really make it pop, make a big difference when you use the sanding block with it. This would be a great one for an underwater scene. It's really cool how this simple technique really can add a lot of definition to the embossing folder that you use. On this next one, I use the Altenew Mod Squares embossing folder. This is a new one. And this is another one of those folders that you'll get a completely different look depending on which side you have your ink blended surface facing in the folder. I thought this one was cool because you get that fun grid background. A lot of texture to this. Okay, I have two more backgrounds for you, and on these I thought I would add a second color on top of the raised areas just to show you that a bit more. This is the organic linen. I did lots of greens, and then I did a pretty heavy amount of sanding over this. Then you wipe it away, and then I applied a light blue ink over the raised areas. So you just lightly drag the ink pad over the raised areas. You don't want to dab because it might get into like the valleys or the crevices. You really want that ink just on the surface. Okay, my final example is an embossing folder that has a border on it. I've used this one in a video. I really like the design of this, and it looks really cool with this technique too. So I have the pink and purple inked background, running it through the embossing folder, and then using the pop technique with the sanding block to kind of sand away the color from the raised areas. Now I wanted to add pink to this. Another way to add a light amount of color, instead of dragging your ink pad, is to just do a little bit of ink blending over the raised areas. So that makes our white sanded areas have a soft pink look to it and makes it a little more subtle. Okay, now that we've created a bunch of inked backgrounds with some raised texture, it's time to turn them into cards. Now I kept the focus on my backgrounds and added die cuts on top. Nothing fancy. So I'm not going to show you the process of putting them together, but I will show you the end results and tell you what I did. I just really focused on ways of adding die cuts and stamped images to the top, but allowing a lot of the background to show. Okay, so for many of my cards, I use the Altenew Fancy Celebrate die, that's there on the left, and the Altenew Fancy For You die, which is on the right. The Celebrate one is a new one. The For You I've used in videos before. I really like fancy word dies like this that are large because they really fill a card nicely and you don't need to add much else. So this one I did add a few stars using this Altenew Layered Stars die set. So you can see the Celebrate is cut from white cardstock 3 times, and then on top of that I did a holographic cardstock. For the stars, I did the same, white cardstock and then holographic cardstock on top. Because I used the Layering Stars die set, the white stars are a little bit bigger underneath the holographic, so it has that little trim to it. I also made sure that I allowed a lot of the background to show. For that little Hey There Rockstar sentiment, I used the Altenew Flower Vine stamp set. This is a favorite of mine and I use it many times in this video. And on this one, I used the same elements to add on top, but I changed up the design. What's fun about this is I used the same square embossing folder on the front flap of our card. And then I trimmed down our inked embossing folder piece and glued it on top, lining up the pattern. So the pattern is continuous across the entire front of the card, some of it with that embossing folder pop technique on it. I really like to use just basic white cardstock with 3D embossing folders because you really see the dimension. In this way, you can see both on one card. I have one more where I used the Celebrate Hey There Rockstar combination for the sentiment. This one, I kept it very simple, so a lot of the background would show. It's really cool that this background and that pink and orange and yellow one that I showed a few minutes ago were made with the same embossing folder, but a completely different results. I just changed up which side of the embossing folder the inking faced, and you get a different look. This next one's very simple. I just added the Celebrate die cut in the center. Again, I stacked the die cuts, so that's 3 white cardstock die cuts thick, so it stands out against the background. I trimmed it down, added it to a white note card, and did 2 thin scraps or strips of holographic cardstock at the top and the bottom just for a bit of definition. This one I plan to use for an anniversary card. Okay, next I use the 4U Fancy die. I die cut it 3 times from white cardstock and glued it together so it'd have nice dimension against the background. I also added little leaves coming out from it, and those I cut from silver glitter cardstock scraps. That's from this new Altenew Branches and Berries die set. This has great small dies that are great to add as accents on a card like I did here. The little sentiment that says sending happy thoughts is from this Tranquility Rose stamp set from Altenew. I like to look through my stamp sets to find those tiny little sentiments that work great on strips like this one. I plan to make more like this with different colors in the background, and I just won't add the sentiment strip to it. And then when I have a particular occasion, I can add the sentiment strip for that occasion. The 4U works with many different things. Okay, for my next few cards, I'm using the new Altenew Floral Lace Die. This is such a cool die. It is 10 inches long, so it works great for a slimline card or a 5x7 card, or you can die cut it and arrange it in different ways on a smaller card. It'd be fun to even cut it up and create a lace background out of it. I'll also be using another fancy die from Altenew, and that's the Thanks version. So here is my card. I have my embossing folder background, trimmed it down, added it to a white card, and then I added the lace die cut on it, kind of coming from the bottom of the card. I then added the Thanks die cut. Now that Thanks die cut is cut twice from black cardstock and glued together, and then once from a black glossy cardstock and glued on top. I am loving black glossy cardstock for word die cuts. It adds a nice shine to it, easy to do, and really makes it stand out. I also added a few pearls and a simple sentiment underneath. I really like the look of that lace die on the card, so here I used one end of the lace die coming up from the bottom and one coming from the top, and then I added my sentiment on top of that. By doing just white die cuts like this, it allows our background to shine but add detail to it also. That Hello die cut is from the Altenew Hugs and Hello die set, which I've used a lot in videos. I like it because it has the shadow die and the word die. I did the shadow from white cardstock and the word hello from a blue glitter cardstock. I then added a few gemstones and a little sentiment strip. Again, those sentiments are from the Flower Vine stamp set from Altenew. I like that this card looks very complicated, but really it's just a bit of inking, embossing folder, and then die cuts on top. Okay, here is another example where I cut down my inked embossing folder background and added it to a note card, lining it up with the embossing folder used on white. So you can see how it has that continuous pattern across it. And I have a leftover inked piece for another card. This time I used the Hugs and Hello die set, white cardstock for the shadow, purple glitter cardstock for the word hello, and then I added 3 little butterflies that I cut from the Altenew Radial Butterflies cover die. Really like the design of this cover die, but you can also use it to create little butterflies to add to cards as I did here. Then, of course, I added a little sentiment strip, which I just feel like brings a little focal point to our sentiment, but you could skip it if you prefer. Back to another example where I used that lace detail die. This time I came up from the bottom, and you can see it really covers the card nicely, but allows a lot of the background to still show. I again used black glossy cardstock for the Thanks die cuts, and I even white heat embossed, sending happy thoughts on top of a black glossy cardstock strip. So you can use that for embossing too. And it just adds shine onto that sentiment. You could add glossy accents, but this shine is very easy to get and it gives a striking look. Okay, this is the Altenew Tall Alpha lowercase die set that I used for that Thanks. I wanted to show you that there is a stamp set that goes with it, so you could use these together or separately. I didn't use this stamp set, but if you wanted to, it helps to add even more dimension to your sentiment. Next up, we have the Tulip embossing folder background. Now on this one, I wanted a lot of the background to show. So I used the 4U Fancy die. I die cut it from white cardstock and from gold glitter cardstock. And I glued them together but slightly offset, so you see a little bit of the white halo right around the edge of the glitter cardstock. I added that to the card and also added a few die cut hearts, again stacked because I like that dimension. and then added a simple sending big hugs sentiment underneath. Now, to allow all these backgrounds to show, on most of my examples, I kept the die cuts like white or silver glitter or basic colors that weren't too distracting from the background. However, you can use these ink textured backgrounds with anything on top. You can do stamping, die cut stamped images, or layered die cuts like I did here. In this case, I did a layered die cut flower from white cardstock, and I just put a little bit of yellow ink on top to make it pop. I also added the stems and the leaves just from basic green cardstock, and then the basic thanks sentiment on top of that. So I still allowed a lot of the background to show, but you can add whatever you want on top. By the way, I used the Altenew Cosmos layering die set. I've been wanting to use this one for some time. It has 2 layering flowers, a couple different stems, and a few leaves. I decided to go with 1 flower so a lot of our background would show. And by the way, I still have 2 backgrounds that I ran out of time to use. Here's the one where I used the light blue ink over the sanded areas. Ended up drying and looking really pretty. And then I also have one of my other floral backgrounds. So I'll have to save those and do something fun with them later. But I'm hoping that in this video I showed you a fun way to use your embossing folders creatively, change up the look that you can get to make colorful backgrounds. If you're interested in the particular products I used, they are linked below in my YouTube description to multiple sources. Also, you can go over to my blog with much more information, and it's linked here on the top right. In the middle are a couple other embossing folder videos you might be interested in. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.